Okay.
So.
Ja.
Okay, ich beginne mit den Lesungen und dann wird Evelyne weitermachen. Und ich lese auf Englisch von dieses Buch. Es heißt Sisters at Sinai und es ist geschrieben von, könnt ihr es sehen?
Ja.
Ja, okay. Und es ist geschrieben von Rabbinerin Jill Hammer. Und was sie getan hat, ist, dass sie hat verschiedene biblische Geschichten, also nicht nur neu interpretiert, aber auch mehr kreativ gestaltet. Und sie hat auch dann zu jeder Geschichte, hat sie auch dann Kommentar, wie sie zu dieser Geschichte und warum sie zu dieser Geschichte gekommen ist. So, ich werde beginnen mit die allererste Geschichte und das heißt Haggada. Beginnen mit 2 Zitaten. Eine ist aus Bereshit. She conceived and bore Cain and said, I have created a man with God. Das ist Bereshit 4:1. And then from Walt Whitman, I am large, I contain multitudes. From Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass. Sorry, ich muss Brillen wechseln. Eve crouched on the green world carpet. Her feet were pleasantly nestled in the soft grass. She was watching the goats and peacocks perform their favorite dance. She did not have the heart to call to them and tell them the world was ending. Instead, she watched over them, hoping they wouldn't figure it out for themselves. Above her, the golden sky ball was slowly falling onto the mountains. Scarlet painted itself onto the soft blue bowl of the sky. The wolves and cats gathered on a hill and began to howl. Eve howled with them. If the world were ending, there should be a ritual for it. She was sure the voice would approve. The voice always seemed to approve of rituals. Behind her, Adam dropped out of a pear tree. He was shivering. Whether or not the voice liked Eve's howl, Adam did not. He put his long arms around her and hugged her to his furry body. He stopped the noise she was making. Nearby, a turtle slipped into the rush of foaming water that wove its way through the clearing. The water of the stream was bright against the dimness of the air. Adam and Eve had argued a few minutes before when the air was still and bright. Adam had thought they should climb onto the mountain caves, away from the sky darkness. Eve had thought they should walk into the sea to meet it. They had not been able to agree. Adam had gone to sulk in the pear tree. Now they were both silent. It grew blacker and blacker. The elephants trumpeted, the owls hooted, fingers of sound poked at the darkness. A walrus slipped off the edge of the land into the ocean. Eve saw the sea looked as thick and formless as the sky. There was a splash. Maybe the land was melting. Eve walked to the place where the stream met the sea, where the water churned up white cattails. She was curious about the end of the world. Adam followed her, tentatively hooting like the night owl, the Lilith. An echo or a reply came back to him across the deep. His feet sank into the crumbly ginger of the sand. Adam smiled. It seemed to Eve that he was remembering something. She felt vaguely uncomfortable that he had been made before her. What memories did he have of the time before her making? Would the world's end be different for him because of his remembering? As if in answer to her thoughts, the voice came winging over the bay. A glass hawk, a mountain's breath. The world is not ending, only the seventh day. Eve wondered if the segments of an orange all had names. Were they called first, fourth, seventh? Adam and Eve listened, but with the sharp ears of bats, looking for direction in the soft, holy sounds around them. They began to hear the boom of frogs and the chirping of insects. Eve suddenly knew to make a circle of smooth, heavy stones. Adam placed a pile of twigs in its center. He took up 2 thin sticks with frayed bark. He drummed them for a while on a stone, then rubbed them together like 2 hungry bodies, harder and harder. Sweat made his brow slick. Eve crouched at his feet and stared intently. To their amazement, a spark like a tiny golden bird burst from the twigs. Eve caught the spark in a cup of dried moss she had pressed into shape with her fingers. Slowly, slowly, the tiny spark lying on the bottom of the cup burrowed into the moss and put out a tongue of flame. Adam took the moss cup and laid it in the nest of branches within the stone circle. The furry bowl blazed up in a sky ball on the ground. Eve and Adam had to back away from its heat. Eve saw the look in Adam's eyes again, the remembering look. Of what did fire remind him? The clearing was bathed in light. Mice, tigers, and salamanders rushed from the meadow into a thunder of footfalls. Startled crows cawed away. Eve jumped at the sound. The animals were afraid of the new thing the humans had made. Eve and Adam were left alone. The fire twinkled and smoked. It was hot when Eve reached out a hand to it, but pleasantly warm at the right distance. With no animals to feed or stroke, Eve and Adam began to watch each other. The pop of a pine cone in the flames was exciting, but there was no aftermath. Then they saw that near the rocks that Eve had placed in a ring, there was a square object. It had a supple skin around it on 3 sides. It made no sound. When Adam picked it up, it fell open into many leaves, as if it were a flower. On the leaves were black markings in groups and patterns. A book, Adam said. Eve looked curiously. Like a butterfly, she guessed. In a way, it changes, Adam told her. The voice told me about it. Eve pondered. It doesn't run away from the fire. Perhaps it is like fire itself. Black and white fire, said Adam. Eve looked up at him. He looked away. He was hiding something that he knew. She saw that look when he talked about the 2 trees at the center of the garden. Eve was sure she was missing something. She took his hand, but he would not look at her. Insects buzzed all around them. Behind the insects came angels. Angels were always in the garden. They sang to grass or picked flowers and stored them in jars. In the morning, they would place golden, grainy bread on stones for Adam and Eve to find. Until now, the angels had avoided the humans. A little winged creature had once frowned at Eve when she found it singing in a leopard's fur. Adam had followed one once, and it had darted into a cedar grove and disappeared. But now angels flitted around the heads of the humans. Some even perched on Adam's shoulders, flapping small stork-like wings. They want to read the book, said Eve. It's mine, Adam replied sharply. Eve was puzzled by Adam's words. Adam's forehead crinkled with worry. He shielded the book with his arms and began muttering to himself. Eve gently shooed away the angels from the clearing with an ostrich feather she had been wearing in her hair, but they returned in greater numbers. She tried to tempt them with blueberries from a nearby bush, but they wanted only the book. A few of them grabbed a corner of it and began pulling. Adam pulled back. Go home, he shouted, pointing at the sky. The angels looked offended. They buzzed around Adam's head, chanting psalms in an irritated way. Adam pored over the book for hours. The angels loitered on the tree branches and dandelion puffs, making an occasional grab when Adam dozed for a minute. Eve waited quietly, wondering why Adam didn't ask for her help. Then there was a noise in the bushes. The noise drew out into a low drumming sound. At first, Eve thought it was a bird, but the voice did not sound like any creature in the garden as much as it sounded like Eve. Eve was intrigued. She glanced at Adam to see his reaction. Adam looked frightened. He began to hum loudly, as if he did not want her to hear. Eve pointed to the bushes, but Adam shook his head. "You shouldn't leave the fire," he said. "Why not?" Eve asked. "The animals are away from the fire." She pointed to a frog on a lily pad. The low drumming sound went on like a heartbeat. Adam closed the book with a snap. "Don't go into the woods," he insisted. "There are dangerous things there." "Like the trees at the center of the garden?" Eve asked angrily. "I listen to you too much. This time I want to find out for myself." With Adam's voice pursuing her, Eve ran off into the woods. At first, Eve ran in blackness, but soon she was able to see dim outlines by the light of the rents in the sky. The woods were strange in the darkness, but they smelled familiar. Eve forged ahead, brushing aside vines and rose briars. A pair of foxes moved out of her way. She passed a panda in its bamboo patch, munching on twigs. From time to time, the rhythmic thumping became louder, fuller, luring her forward. It began to echo her footfalls as if it were her shadow moving ahead of her. Eve was feeling her way through a fern grove when the feathery plants were suddenly brilliantly lit. Eve thought day had returned. Then she realized that the light was a strange color. Looking up, Eve saw a huge blue-white disk in the sky. She was afraid of it and put her hands up to her eyes. "It is the moon," said a voice beside her. Eve looked next to herself in consternation. Another Eve stood there. Where Eve had parchment pale skin and dark hair, this new Eve had skin like ink. Her white hair streamed down her black skin like 100 comet tails, squiggling and curving. She had the same triangle of fur at the place where her legs came together, but it was white as milk. The second woman was smiling at Eve and drumming her fingers on a tree at the center of the grove. It was the sound Eve had heard in the clearing. Eve saw why Adam had smiled at the fire. This woman was like the echo of a flame. Eve felt strange inside. "I thought I was the only one of what I was," she said. She did not know where else to begin. "Oh, you are," said the second Eve. "My name is Lilith." And then Eve remembered the word Adam had called at night when he was dreaming. She knew this woman was a memory Adam had from before she came to be. "I do not want you here," Eve said. "Neither does Adam," said Lilith. "I have been banished from the garden because I would not obey him and lie beneath him, because I named myself. I have been given this night only to convince you. Then I must leave again, forever." "Convince me of what?" Eve asked suspiciously. Only the voice and Adam ever tried to convince her of things. She did not want to listen to Lilith. "That you need to leave the garden." Eve shook her head angrily. "This is my home. Even if it is dark now, it is still my home. I will not leave." "I also have a home," said Lilith. She looked a little sad, less fiery. Eve felt curiosity uncurl within her. Where did one live if one was outside of Eden? "Where is your home?" she asked. What do you do there?" "I live in the sea," said Lilith, "and give birth to children." "Children?" Eve did not know the word. She was getting frustrated by her lack of vocabulary. She needed more words. "Like kittens, like fawns. the small who will grow larger. Eve smiled. She had seen young creatures playing in Eden, chicks and lambs. But they are all taken from me, Lilith said, and now her voice had an angry tone. Each one of them is taken, and the angels have told me I will never see them again unless... Unless? Eve asked. Unless you too give birth to children. My children are the souls of yours. Until their bodies for them, they cannot remain in the world. My sons and daughters need you in order to become free. Eve remembered the elephant squeezing out her calf by the river. I do not want children, she insisted. There can be nothing new without children, Lilith said. Without the young, there will be no one to inherit your memories. Eve thought of the small bear cubs playing in the hills. Even if I did want children, she said defensively, I don't know how to have them. I know, Lilith said, and in order to learn, you will have to eat from the tree at the center of the garden. Not the tree of life, which is the tree from which I have eaten, but from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Then time will begin, and you will know what to do. But if I eat from that tree, I will die. You are trying to kill me so that you can have Adam back. Eve started away from the woman beside her. She wanted to break into the woods and find Adam again, keep him away from this other woman who disobeyed the voice. Lilith grabbed Eve's wrist in her dark fist. It is true that if you eat from the tree, you will someday die, she said. But it is also true that if you do not eat the fruit, you will truly never live. I do not understand, Eve said, trying to break away. I know, said Lilith. That is why I have come. Lilith walked away from Eve to the center of the glade, crouched, and drew a circle in the soil. Around the circle she placed stones. Then she began to rub two sticks together. You are making fire, Eve exclaimed, slowly drawing closer. So Adam had learned to start fires from Lilith. Yes, said Lilith. The sparks that flew from Lilith's sticks caught and flamed upward. The fire became a towering pillow, a shape with branches and leaves. The tree burned, but it was not consumed by the fire. Lilith kindled another flame, and a second pillar formed beside the first, a darker column, flickering. Smoke bit at Eve's eyes. She recognized the shapes. Lilith was showing her the trees at the center of the garden. The trees, the voice, had told them not to touch. Watch, Lilith commanded. Eve crouched and watched. The fruits of the two fiery trees began to swell larger and larger until their taut roundness rivaled the moon. Then they burst like seed pods into the night. Sparks scattered everywhere, glowed in every part of the sky, then disappeared. Eve gasped at their unbearable, momentary beauty. She had never before seen anything that reached so deeply into her heart. That is what we are meant to do, said Lilith to Eve. We are meant to scatter our sparks in the world. Without that task, we are not alive. And so you must begin death and hope and children. You must bear bodies for the souls that are waiting. You must begin the story, Eve. And disobedience, said Eve, quietly after a long moment. I must begin that as well. I have begun that for you, said Lilith. When I have picked the fruit, will the voice be silent? Asked Eve. Lilith smiled, her dark eyes glowing with the firelight. You may find that even in rebellion, you are following the sound of the voice. There was a rushing of stork's wings. Angels came flying in shimmering bunches toward the fern glade. Gathering around Lilith, they lifted her up into the air. Eve grabbed Lilith's hands and tried to hold her. The angels persisted. Eve was forced to let go as Lilith rose further and farther from the earth. Lilith waved with an ink-colored hand. Then she spread two immense silver wings and flew away, singing in Eve's voice. Eve turned and made her way back to the clearing by the sea. Soon there was a reddish glow through a stand of pines. Eve followed it and stepped into a ring of light. Adam was still engaged in a tug of war with the angels, who had grown bigger and brighter and more numerous during the struggle. As Eve watched, the angels pried the book from Adam's fingers and leapt off with it into the forest. Adam breathed heavily and sagged into Eve's arms, where he lay quietly for a minute. "It doesn't matter," he said to Eve. "I read it first." "What did you learn?" Eve asked. She settled by the circle of stones, folding her legs beneath her. "The way to the future," Adam answered slowly. His eyes shifted toward her. "Did you find anything in the forest?" Eve wanted to tell him about Lilith, but somehow she was not ready. She knew it was the first separation between them. "I saw a night owl hatching her eggs," he said. Adam handed Eve a roasted apple as a gift. She bit into it hungrily. It was wrinkled and liquid from the fire. Then she arranged a bed of soft leaves and petals. The embers of the fire dimmed as the two humans lay down to sleep. The darkness was no longer frightening. Instead, it rested as a kind of cloak over their dreams. Das ist Geschichte. Die Kommentar dazu ist auch kurz. Und ich lese das kurz auch. Okay? Isaac Luria, the great Kabbalist, posited that at the beginning of creation, there was a great shattering. The vessels into which God had poured the primordial light broke, and both the sparks of light and the shards of the vessel were scattered throughout the universe. It became the task of humans to repair the vessels and the light and to return the world to its perfect state. Luria identified the eating of the fruit with this breaking of vessels. He called his image of God tree of life and said that humans shared the attributes that made up this tree. Luria identified the tree of knowledge with good and evil as the shadow and the dark side of the dark tree. Luria identified the tree of knowledge of good and evil as the shadow, the dark side of the tree of life. Luria saw the Garden of Eden as a parable, a tale about the human condition and the divine purpose. Isaac Luria has had a deep impact on my theology. I see the world as a place that is broken, that requires the partnership of humans and God in order to repair it. It is the world's brokenness that makes this partnership possible. For me, even the Torah has broken places that need repair. This is one reason to do midrash. I imagine Eve in the Garden of Eden as a woman who does not yet know that this is her task. She must somehow learn about brokenness and its repair. Into Eve's garden, I invite Lilith. The only mention of Lilith in the Bible is as a night demon or a night owl. In a medieval book called Alphabet of Ben Sira, Lilith is described as Adam's first wife, who rebels against him, claims to be his equal, and flies away from him. She escapes to the Sea of Reeds and refuses to return even when God sends angels back to bring her back. God then creates Eve as a second wife for Adam. Lilith is told that she will become a demon and will give birth to hundreds of children a day, but that they will all perish. In rabbinic lore, Lilith is a danger to children and pregnant women and is a seducer of men. Modern feminist midrash has interpreted Lilith as the original liberated woman, untainted by patriarchal domination, and perhaps even Eve's teacher. In fact, Lilith, in her connection to fertility, mortality, and freedom, is very similar to Eve, who is the mother of all life, who chooses wisdom, mortality, and free will in a single bite. In my poem, Eve and Lilith, I express my sense that Eve and Lilith are actually the same woman, and they are separate only in the perception of others. This story stems partly from that insight. For many years, the legend of the death of Lilith's myriad children disturbed me. Then it occurred to me that if Lilith and Eve are the same person, then their children are the same as well. Lilith's ethereal children are the souls of Eve's corporeal ones. It is written in the Talmud that at the time of creation, many souls pressed forward to be born. Perhaps Lilith, driven by her children's need to be born, entered the garden one last time to plant the seeds of Eve's rebellion to begin human history. When Eve gives birth for the first time, she says, "I have created a man with God." Eve's sense of her partnership with God, her sharing in God's creative powers, has always moved me. Perhaps that partnership became possible only after Eve rebelled. For to engage in creation is to take some of God's power for yourself. To create is to assert that the world is not yet finished, that you must participate in its completion, in your own completion. Changing the world and changing the self are deeply human activities. They are sacred activities that constantly engage the people we meet throughout the Bible. Havdalah is based on the legend of the origins of Havdalah, the celebration of the separation between the Sabbath and the rest of the week. There is a rabbinic midrash that Adam and Eve become afraid when night falls in the garden. To comfort them, God shows them how to make fire. This, according to the rabbis, is the first Havdalah, the first ceremony of separation, the first blessing over fire. Fire is one symbol for revelation, and the time of Havdalah can be a time of insight. Another midrash describes how Adam received a book called the Book of Raziel, which contains the secrets of heaven and earth and the generations of humankind. The angels are jealous of this knowledge and seek to take it from him. Adam is instructed to hide this book from the angels lest they learn too many divine secrets. Like the legend of Lilith, the story of the Book of Raziel deals with the consequences of wisdom and generativity. I see the revelation of Lilith to Eve as a parallel to the revelation of the Book of Raziel to Adam. The biblical text purports to represent Eve as a subservient to Adam, saying, "He shall rule over you." Yet Eve is the one who sets the action in motion by taking the fruit. In the Bible, Eve is a deep part of the unfolding of the story. She is the beginning because she was made at the beginning, but she is also the beginning because she chose to be. Learn, as many modern poets and prophets have learned, to revere her as the ancestor of our own free will, our own creative urge. So, das war von Sisters at Sinai.
Danke.
Danke.
Gerne. So, jetzt, Evelyne.
Okay, also ich habe mir vorgenommen, euch über die Brauer Haggada zu erzählen. Es gibt sehr viele Haggadot. Diese Brauer Haggada ist 1979 entstanden und zeichnet sich, ihr habt ja schon einiges durchgemacht über Brauer mit der Katharina. Also die Lebensgeschichte, glaube ich, kennt sie von Brauer.
Evelyne,
Ja.
Irgendwas stimmt nicht mit deinem Ton.
Ja,
Wir hören dich schlecht.
es ist schwer zu verstehen.
Oh je, schon wieder, das ist ein Problem.
Jetzt ist okay.
Geht. Jetzt ist okay. Naja, vielleicht, wenn ich direkt hineinspreche, jetzt ist besser.
Darf ich einen Vorschlag machen? Dreh deine Kamera ab. Manchmal hilft es den Ton. Das heißt, wir sehen dich nicht beim Lesen, aber wir hören dich dann.
Ihr kennt mich, also geben wir die Kamera weg. Ist jetzt besser?
Du musst weiter.
Verstehe. Geht nicht.
Ich weiß nicht, du musst
nicht
mehr sagen, sonst wissen wir
naja,
nicht.
Was, also gut, ich erzähle, ich habe die Brauer Haggada ausgesucht, weil sie so durch die Bilder besticht. Ihr habt ja wahrscheinlich mit der Katharina über den Brauer gesprochen, über seine Lebensgeschichte,
ja.
Nehme ich an, oder? Ja, also das heißt, das kann ich mir ersparen. Es ist nur das Erstaunliche, also 1979 ist diese Haggada entstanden und für mich ist das Erstaunliche, dass jemand, der eigentlich Atheist war, versteht sie mich nicht?
Es ist sehr schlecht.
Verstehst du nicht?
Es ist nach wie vor, ich weiß nicht.
Nicht gut. Nein,
Es
dann
macht
hat
keine Unterschiede auf deiner Kamera.
es keinen Sinn. Es hat keinen Sinn dann.
Es ist komisch, weil es geht
ihr
rein und
nicht
raus. Jetzt ist in Ordnung. Aber dann, du beginnst zu reden und plötzlich fängt es an, wirklich furchtbar zu sein.
Ja, na, das ist eigenartig, wenn normalerweise über dieses Tablet mache ich viele Sachen. Also ich habe auch mein Torah-Studium mache ich über
Evelyn,
dieses
jetzt
Tablet.
ist alles in Ordnung. Mach nur weiter und wir sagen dich, wenn es nicht geht.
Okay, also dann halte ich den Kopf absolut ruhig. Dann ist es für mich zwar schwer, ins Buch zu schauen, aber wir werden das schon hinkriegen. Es ist sowieso, habe ich mich entschlossen, nur das Vorwort und das Nachwort zu lesen. Das Vorwort ist von einem Herrn Javor. Der war ein ungarischer Jude, ein Industrieller, der die Zeitschrift
Sorry, es beginnt wieder schlecht zu werden.
Hat keinen Sinn. Ich sage euch was, das hat keinen Sinn.
Jetzt
Ich
ist es komisch,
gebe eine
du hörst
Empfehlung.
auf und dann wird es wieder besser.
Ja, aber ich weiß nicht, wann, es hat keinen Sinn, wenn die Hälfte nicht zu hören ist. Nicht?
Ja,
Das ist nervig für euch. Ich mache folgenden Vorschlag, lassen wir es bei dem. Ich empfehle euch nur, diese Haggada, die Katze, jetzt kommt noch die Katze daher, diese Haggada euch zuzulegen irgendwann. Sie ist wunderbar. Also es sind die Bilder wunderschön und es ist auch die Sprache vom Arik Brauer natürlich ein bisschen anders als jetzt eine Haggada von einem Rabbiner. Und sehr interessant ist auch der Dialog mit dem Oberrabbiner Eisenberg. Und also es ist wirklich eine qualitativ sehr hochstehende Haggada. Soll ich euch das noch weiter was vorlesen aus dem Vorwort? Oder bin ich wieder weg?
ich meine, Annemarie, wie klingt es für dich?
Bitte, hörst du mich jetzt?
Es wechselt sehr stark.
Es wechselt, ja.
Oh je, das ist für euch mühsam, das bringt es nicht.
Jetzt passt
Ich
wieder.
empfehle euch, ich zeige euch das Foto, also ich bin aus dem Bild, ich zeige euch das Foto von der Haggada.
Ja, der.
So schaut es aus.
Haggada.
Ja. Und ich weiß nicht, ob ihr die fantastischen Realisten schätzt als Maler. Die Bilder, die er da drinnen gemalt hat, sind wunderschön. Und es ist auch der Text interessant, weil er muss im tiefsten Herzen muss ein gläubiger Mensch gewesen sein, sonst hätte er nicht die Haggada geschrieben. Er hätte was anderes geschrieben, obwohl er ja eigentlich aus der kommunistischen Ecke kommt. Also es ist eine spannende Geschichte und auch der Dialog mit dem Paul Chaim Eisenberg ist nett, ist witzig. Wie gesagt, ich kann natürlich jetzt anfangen, euch das Vorwort von diesem Herrn Javor vorzulesen.
Nein, Evelyne, es ist
Sagt mir, wenn es keinen
sorry,
Sinn hat, okay?
es ist
Kann man nicht verstehen.
Lass mal.
geht einfach nicht.
Okay,
Ja,
wir lassen es.
Warte.
Dann lassen wir es.
ja, schade.
Das lassen wir es. Das war so gut von der Giuliana, das hat keinen Sinn.
Ja, aber vielleicht
Wenn's nicht
behalte das
geht.
und
Ich
vielleicht
weiß
kannst
nicht,
du es
warum es
trotzdem
nicht geht.
einen anderen Mal lesen.
Ein anderes Mal, ja.
Ja,
Ja.
ich kann es euch nur, ich weiß nicht, ob ihr die Haggada habt. Habt ihr jede eine Haggada?
Mehrere?
Habt nicht verstanden.
Ja,
Habt ihr?
ich habe mehrere.
Ja,
Es ist auch interessant zu vergleichen. Die verschiedenen Haggadot zu vergleichen ist interessant.
Ich
Ja, wie
will
schreibt?
erstens aufhören mit die Aufnahme.
Ja,